Hello, this is Professor Broker, and this is your Chapter 15 lecture for Econ 231, Monopolies Part 1. Let's get started. Okay, now in Chapter 15, we're going to be talking about monopolies, which is different, the polar opposite from what we talked about in Chapter 14, which was competitive firms. Okay, now the key characteristic here is that monopolies are going to have market power. That means they're going to have pricing power. Okay, and that's going to create some differences for our firm analysis. Remember, competitive firms, there was lots of buyers and sellers, and so no firm had any market power. And in a monopoly, we're assuming that they are the sole firm, and so they do have market power. So we're going to see how that changes the analysis. So again, why do some markets only have one seller? What are some of the market characteristics that bring that about? How does a monopoly determine their quantity and the price to charge? Remember, they have two choices now. When they have market power, they're not only going to be determining quantity, but then what price are they going to charge for their product, because they are going to have pricing power. And then how does monopoly's decision affect economic well-being? We're going to look at different dynamic pricing, also called price discrimination among monopolies. And then what are some of the public policies aimed at monopolies to try to help the general public? Because remember, we said competition was the best regulator for consumers, right? Because firms competing with each other is really hard on businesses, but really good for consumers. What we're going to see with monopolies is that, perhaps, this is a role that the government can play to step in to try to help consumers when firms have market power. Okay, so why do monopolies arise? Essentially, the main reason is because of some barrier to entry. Okay, other firms would like to enter the market, but they can't for some reason. Okay, and there's three main sources of barriers to entry. Okay, the first one is that the government actually gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce the good. And you might be thinking, that's unbelievable. Why would the government create a monopoly? Isn't that bad for consumers? And the answer is, in this case, yes and no. It's potentially more expensive for consumers on the front end, but this, what the government does in creating legal barriers to entry, legal monopolies for a time, can actually promote some development and innovation. And one of the main ways it does that is through patent and copyright law. So, a new invention, right, can get a patent. Okay, maybe it's a new, electronic device. Maybe it's a new some new technology. Maybe it's a new pharmaceutical drug. This is a big area, right? Now, many of these inventions take lots of time, effort, energy, and money, sometimes millions, even billions of dollars for companies or individuals to invest, in to get the final product. Well, what would encourage or induce how do we want to be encouraging that kind of innovation? Most people would say yes. And one of the only ways to do that is to sort of put a carrot at the end of the line. Basically, if a company or if a person invests all the time, effort, and energy into developing a new pharmaceutical drug that cures diseases, or a new invention that, like an iPhone or something like that, then a company or a person can then reap the profits for about, for a few years, maybe 3, 7, maybe even 10 or 20 years. They can be a monopoly because they have the patent and have the exclusive right to sell that new invention, and then that means they can reap the rewards. And so it's done as an incentive to encourage innovation and things like that. So that is one area. Now, the patents do expire. I'm not aware of companies that have patents into perpetuity that just last forever. And so, these can be expensive for consumers on the front end, but then those patents will expire, and then competition takes over and lowers prices for consumers. Okay, another barrier to entry is a single firm can own a key resource, right? This would be like De Beers Diamonds. De Beers Diamonds owns something like 80% of the world's diamond mines in the world. And so, clearly they have tremendous market power when it comes to diamonds. They're very close to a perfect monopoly, and it's not because other firms don't want to get in, or not that they can't legally get in. It's that they don't own the diamond mines. De Beers Diamonds does. Okay, so they're a monopoly. And then finally, some markets, this may be counterintuitive, but some markets aren't actually conducive for the typical competitive market structure that we talked about in Chapter 14. It actually makes more economic sense for them to be what's called natural monopolies, or it makes sense for just one firm to provide the good or service, and we would call these natural monopolies. Okay, let's look at an example of how this could take place. This would typically take place in a market. Let's say it's electricity, and an electricity company is trying to serve 1,000 homes, and they have a cost structure that looks something like this. Now, again, in Chapter 13, we learned that this would be an average total cost curve that it's experiencing economies of scale, right? Economies of scale. It's declining as output is increasing. Okay, now what could cause that? Essentially, what would cause that is huge fixed cost on the front end and then small marginal cost after that. Okay, well, think about the electricity market. Right? I mean, there would be huge upfront cost to setting up an electricity grid, the power lines and everything. I mean, the entire grid connecting to the power plant and setting up the grid across the city. That would be hugely expensive. But then turning the grid on for one home, right? And then the next home, and then the third home, and then the fourth home would not create huge amounts of extra cost or extra marginal cost. And so the electricity market would be a good example of this. Okay, so if a firm does have a cost structure that looks like this, okay, let's compare the example of one firm providing this electricity to all 1,000 homes versus two firms evenly splitting the market. Okay, let's take a look at that, right? So if two firms are going to produce, let's just say that each firm then provides electricity, right, for 500 homes. Okay, that's half of the market, and that costs them $80 a home. Okay, and so $80 per home, okay, is their cost, times 500 equals each firm. It would cost them $40,000 to service half the market. But remember, there's two firms, which means the total cost of two firms providing this electricity would be $80,000. Now, what if one firm, right, provided the entire market? Well, then the average total cost would decline because of the shape of our average total cost curve. And now those one firm providing electricity for all 1,000 homes would only cost them $50 a home. Well, 50 times 1,000 would mean that the entire market could be provided with electricity for only $50,000. Thus, average total cost is lower if only one firm provides all the 1,000 homes. And this is an example of a natural monopoly. This market would be best provided for or more efficiently provided for if only one firm serviced it rather than having multiple firms service it. This would be a good example of a natural monopoly. Most often your local utilities are what we would call natural monopolies. Think about the city of Murray. Your electricity companies, Murray Electric, right? You've got Murray Municipal Utilities for your natural gas and water, right? These are monopolies, right? And one is a heavily regulated electricity provider. The other one is a public provision. The local government actually runs Murray Municipal Utilities, and that's one approach to dealing with monopolies. Okay, so again, these are the three barriers we need to be aware of. The government can give the exclusive right to a firm to produce. That's through patents and such. Then a single firm might own a key resource, and then there can be markets that are natural monopolies, where it naturally makes sense for a monopoly to serve that market, and we've seen how that works as well. Now, let's talk. Remember our competitive firm's demand curve. Do you remember what it looked like? Remember that price equaled marginal revenue, and the firm could produce as much as it wanted to without changing the market price. Therefore, the quote-unquote demand curve for the competitive firm was actually horizontal. Remember that horizontal line was not only price, but also marginal revenue, and also our demand curve for the competitive firm. Okay, and that's again because they could increase output without changing price. That's not going to be true for a monopoly. Okay, a monopoly, when they are the only game in town, and so when they increase output, that's going to lower the price because of the law of demand. When they decrease output, that's going to raise the price because of the law of demand and because there's a relationship there. And so the monopolist demand curve is really going to be the market demand curve, which, remember, we said was downward sloping, okay, because of the law of demand. Okay, and so competitive firm was very small compared to the overall market. That's why theirs was horizontal. The monopoly is the market, and so they will face the downward sloping market demand curve, which means, okay, marginal revenue now is not going to equal price. This is very important. For the competitive firm, marginal revenue did equal price. That's because price never changed. In this case, for monopolists, price is going to change as they change output. Therefore, marginal revenue will change as well. Okay, let's look at an example of how that might work. Common Grounds is the only seller of cappuccinos. Let's see what happens. Let's calculate their total revenue, okay, in this column, and then we're going to see what their average revenue is. Remember, total revenue is simply price times quantity, okay, and we get this box, price times quantity here. Average revenue is total revenue divided by quantity, and then marginal revenue is the change in total revenue as we change output. So let's take a look at what we have here. Remember, marginal revenue is simply going to be price times quantity. So 0 times 4.5 is 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 3.5 is 7, and so on. 3 times 3 is 9. Right? There's our total revenue. Okay? Average revenue. Average revenue is simply going to be this 4 divided by 1, which would be 4. 7 divided by 2, which would be 3.5, and so on. Now, what do you notice about the relationship between price and average revenue? Notice they are the same. 3 and 3, 2.5, 2.5, 2 and 2. Okay? Again, price for all these markets is going to equal average revenue, which is the same as a competitive firm. But now let's look at marginal revenue. Okay? How much is total revenue changing by as we increase output here? Well, it looks like it's changing by 4. Okay, which looks roughly equal to price. Okay, but then as we go from the first to the second unit, it's changing by 3, which is a little bit less than the price. Then from quantity 2 to 3, it's changing by 2, which is less than price. From 3 to 4, it's changing by 1, which is less than price, and so on. So you notice, right, that marginal revenue is not only not equal to price, it starts out fairly equal to it, but then marginal revenue for a monopoly is going to be less than price, especially as you substantially increase output. Okay, so that's going to be our relationship. Let's apply this to a graph. Okay, and if we plot our demand curve, right, and our marginal revenue curve, our demand curve should look something like this, with price, okay, on the y-axis and the quantity on the x-axis. Notice we plot, 0 and 4.5, and then quantity of 1 and a price of 4, and so on. We get a linear demand curve there. The marginal revenue curve will start out with a similar y-intercept, right? Okay. In fact, if we connected it all the way to 0, it would have the same intercept. Okay, but our marginal revenue curve would always be then after that less than demand, because marginal revenue will be less than price. Okay. In fact, if it's linear, if you have a linear demand curve, the mathematical relationship between these two curves is that both of these curves will have the same y-intercept, okay, but marginal revenue will have twice the slope of your demand curve. Okay, that would be the mathematical relationship if your demand curve is linear. Now, what about the supply curve? Well, monopoly is a price maker, not a price taker. They're going to set their price according to the demand curve as opposed to taking the price as a given. And their quantity they're going to be setting, quantity and price for monopoly are going to be jointly determined by marginal cost and marginal revenue and the demand curve. It's going to be a complicated relationship between all these forces acting together. Fundamentally, the monopoly doesn't have what we call, quote unquote, a supply curve. What their supply curve is really going to be is simply their marginal cost curve. They're going to be setting output, okay, according to where marginal revenue intersects marginal cost. Okay, that would be their profit maximizing level of output, just like for the competitive firm. But then they're going to take it one step further and then set price according to demand. And so basically, we don't include a quote unquote supply curve for monopoly. We simply use their marginal cost curve. Okay. Now, I kind of watch you through it, but now, how do they determine their profit maximizing situation? Well, again, they're going to find output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, because that's going to make the most sense for the monopoly, just like it was for the competitive firm. Then the monopolist is going to try to set the price, the highest price they think consumers are willing to pay. Well, what's the highest price consumers are willing to pay? Well, it's going to be the price according to the demand curve, because the demand curve represents what price consumers are willing to pay at each given quantity. Okay? And so if we have a graph that looks something like this, okay, this is a typical monopoly structure. Monopolist structure. You have an upward sloping marginal cost curve. Okay, you have a downward sloping demand, and then you have a marginal revenue curve that's downward sloping that has the same intercept as demand and twice the slope as your demand. Okay, so it's less than the price. Now, where are they going to? There's a couple ways we can do this. Remember how we graphically found profit and all kinds of things for the competitive firm? We can use that same process for the monopolist. First, we want to find Q star. This is our 4-step process for analyzing this particular market. We want to find Q star. We're going to find that where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Then we want to find price. In this case, it's not given. It's going to be up from the quantity point all the way up to the demand curve. Okay. Then we're going to find on that plane where at Q star, where does that intersect average total cost? Then we're simply going to apply our profit formula, which was quantity times price minus average total cost, and that will give us our profit graphic, our rectangle. Okay. So first, let's find Q star. Q star is going to be where MR equals MC, right? That's going to be our profit maximizing or loss minimizing level of output right there, okay? Where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now, step 2 is we're going to take on this plane, okay? We're going to go up to the demand curve, okay? Up to the demand curve. And that then over to the y-axis, that's going to give us our price the monopolist will charge, okay? Then we throw in an average total cost curve here, okay? We would, on this plane, Q star, okay, where it intersects marginal revenue, marginal cost, we would either take that up or down, okay? I apologize. Let me go up here to price, okay? I would either take that up or down to my average total cost curve. If I take it up from here, obviously the monopolist would be earning a loss. If I take it down to average total cost, like this example, then price would be greater than average total cost, and obviously they would be making a profit. Okay? And so then this rectangle right here, where price minus average total cost times quantity would give me my profit rectangle. Okay? Now, let's compare the competitive firm, okay, to the monopoly firm for just a second so that we can kind of see the differences, okay? Notice that we have price and we have marginal cost and average total cost, okay? We also have demand in both, right? In the monopoly, they have a downward sloping demand. This price function is the marginal revenue and the demand curve for the competitive firm, okay? Now, for the competitive firm, remember, they would find where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that would be their Q star. Okay, then they would take that down to average total cost, okay, because the price is a given, and then that rectangle there would be their profit function. Now, the problem is for the competitive firm is they don't have barriers to entry. So remember, the profits would act like a magnet. They would attract entry. So if that cappuccino firm is a monopoly, right? Or let's just say that they're a competitive firm, but they're the only one currently, and they're making these cappuccinos and making lots of money, what would other entrepreneurs likely do? They would also open up coffee shops, right? And that would, in the competitive market, would increase supply, decreasing price, which would decrease the price that our competitive firm faces, which would evaporate their profits, okay, and lead them to this long-run equilibrium situation where price equals marginal revenue, yes, but it equals marginal cost and thus average total cost at its minimum. Price equals average total cost at its minimum in the competitive firm's long-run equilibrium. Okay, so this is what would happen in the competitive firm. Now, in the monopoly, again, we do a similar process. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? Then we would find the price according to the demand curve, okay? Then we would take that down to average total cost, and this would be our profit rectangle. The difference here is that we're not going to have a decrease in price, everything else equal, because firms can't enter this market. Thus, unlike the competitive firm, which loses its profits in the long run and earns long-run zero economic profits, the monopoly can earn long-run economic profits. This profit rectangle is not going to change, everything else equal, because other firms aren't going to enter the market because they can't. They would want to, but they can't. Think about a patent. If I have a patent on a pharmaceutical drug that's really successful, okay, other firms can't legally copy that formula and enter this market. Thus, I'm able, as a monopolist, to earn profits as long as the patent lasts. Now, because the monopoly can earn long-run economic profits and price is going to be above marginal cost, and price is above average total cost, then that's going to create some welfare losses for the monopolist. Okay, welfare in this case meaning benefits to society. Okay, and so if we want to maximize the welfare to a market, we want to maximize welfare to consumers, which we'd call consumer surplus. We'd want to maximize welfare to producers, we'd call producer surplus, and we want to maximize those together, which we'd call total surplus. The maximizing the size of the economic pie and total welfare. In this case, what we're going to see is that the monopolist does not maximize total welfare. There's actually economic loss as a result of a monopolist. Let's see how. Okay, remember, in a competitive equilibrium, price is going to equal marginal cost, maximizing total surplus. Okay, but in the monopoly, price is going to be greater than both of those. Okay, thus, the monopoly is going to be producing less than the competitive quantity, okay, and charging higher than the competitive price, which is what's going to give us the loss of efficiency. Okay, the loss of efficiency we're going to call a deadweight loss. Let's see where it would be. Okay, now if I substitute in here this marginal cost curve for my supply for a second, okay, remember that the supply curve really is the function of all the individual competitive firms' marginal cost curves. Okay, so imagine this is the competitive market. Okay, you got your marginal cost or supply here, you got your competitive demand. Okay, where's equilibrium? Where they intersect, right? And at that point, okay, competitive quantity and competitive price is going to equal marginal cost, which is going to maximize consumer and producer surplus in the overall market. It's going to maximize efficiency. There's not going to be any what we call deadweight loss or lost valuable transactions that are lost. Those aren't going to happen in the competitive outcome. But let's look at a monopolist. Okay, same market. Now we throw in a marginal revenue curve. Where's the monopolist going to produce? The monopolist is going to produce right here, right, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost for them, which is going to be a smaller quantity, a higher price, okay, and thus price is greater than marginal cost, which gives us this triangle right here, okay, which we call deadweight loss. Now, what this triangle represents is that fact that buyers on this demand curve value this product more than it costs the monopolist to make it. In other words, imagine going to get ice cream, right? And the buyers are willing to pay $5 for the ice cream. It only costs the seller $1 to make it. Clearly, there's the potential for a beneficial transaction to take place, right? They could sell it for $3, let's say, and the buyer would still get a deal, and the seller would get a deal because it would work for them. That's basically what's going on in these transactions, but they're not taking place because the monopolist has reasoned that they can make more money by restricting output. Okay, it's just the basic economics of it. Well, that basically destroys these beneficial transactions. We call that a deadweight loss. Okay? And again, these transactions are lost, and we have this deadweight loss because of the market power of the monopoly. Any market with market power or firm with market power is going to have some measure of deadweight loss. Okay? Because again, the units between QM and QC are not sold. The monopoly quantity and the competitive quantity. These are valuable units to the buyers, and they value them more than it costs the monopoly to produce them. Okay, and so the monopoly prevents some mutually beneficial transactions. That's the definition of deadweight loss. And we'll talk about that more in our next presentation.